Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this event hosted by the European Commission within the COP28 and dedicated to the need for further transparency and integrity on ESG rating activities. My name is Ugo Bassi, and I am Director in charge of financial markets at the European Commission, Directorate General for Financial Stability, Financial Services, and Capital Markets Union. I'll be your host today, and I will be accompanied today by a number of distinguished panelists. Some are here with me, and one other is connected. First of all, going from the my right side to the left, we have David Doyle, Vice President, Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy, Europe, Middle East, and Africa of S&P Global, Standard & Poor, the industry, of course, which will be most impacted by the initiatives which are ongoing in this area. Then we have Elizabeth Gambert, CSR and International Affairs Director from AFEP, the Association of French Large Companies. On my left, I have Tanguy van de Verde, Director General of the European Fund and Asset Management Association, better known as EFAMA, and connected from Paris, I presume, we have Iliana Lani from ESMA, Head of Conduct, Supervision and Convergence, European Securities and Markets Authority. With all these guests, we will speak about ESG ratings. This is an issue which has become increasingly important in the recent years, and which is a very important piece of the sustainable finance framework which the Commission is trying to put in place. Um, uh, Today, ESG ratings play an enabling role for the proper functioning of the EU sustainable finance market by providing critical sources of information for investment strategies, risk management, and disclosure obligations by investors and financial institutions. They're also used by undertakings who seek to better understand sustainability risks and opportunities linked to their activities or those of their partners, and for comparison to their peers. As you all know, I hope, the Commission has put forward a proposal in order to introduce more transparency in the market of ESG ratings, and in order to make it more efficient, with the ultimate objective, of course, to reduce or mitigate the risks of green washing. The proposal is currently being discussed by the legislator, the European Parliament, and the Council, and possibly the first trialogues will take place still within the end of this year, with the hope that we might conclude and adopt the proposal, the text, by the end of this mandate, to be seen whether we will be able to do it or not. The reasons why we introduced this proposal, because we, after a number of consultative initiatives, after a number of consultations, it emerged a need for better comparability, reliability, and transparency on the operations of the providers. One important point is that the proposal does not aim at harmonizing the methodologies used by the providers, but only to introduce more transparency about that. There is transparency about the rating, but there is not so much transparency today on what is behind the rating, on how providers arrive at that, and I'm sure that David will tell us more about it. I don't want to steal too much of the time to these distinguished panelists, and precisely I would like to ask them immediately to step in, and I will start by David. I will ask everyone to deliver a 10 minutes introductory, let's say, a statement for each speaker. And at the end of it, we will hopefully still have time for a final round of comments, but we will see how it goes. I will first of all then ask now David to take the floor. David, the floor is yours.
Ugo, grazie. And thank you very much for the invite to be here. I think it's a super interesting time to be talking about these as the legislation is on the table. I'm going to be positive. We're here to talk about COP. We're here to talk about the change we need to see, and I hope this positivity will be infectious, not just for the people in the room, the people watching, but also the people at COP. We really need to see optimism and positivity to get the change that we need to see. But I think we really have a fantastic opportunity here with the EU ESG ratings regulation to bring about some of that change. You mentioned some of the challenges, Ugo, and I think you have an opportunity on the table. The EU has an opportunity to set a global benchmark for regulating, a high quality standard in ESG ratings, so that we can actually use these tools to look at the risks and opportunities from a sustainability perspective in our economy. I think that change has started a little while ago back with IOSCO, but we need to build that momentum behind the change that we want to see. So I'm excited. I think this regulation will have a positive impact. At S&P Global, we've been working on it for a number of years, and we'd like to move the conversation forward towards implementation and towards seeing the change that you mentioned that the policy is intended to bring about. Maybe a little context before we kind of kick off. ESG ratings are not new. The history of S&P Global's ESG ratings really stretches back almost a quarter of a century. So almost back in 1999, our ESG scores were first used to power the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And I was 14 at that time, so it just tells you this has been around for quite a long time. And I think the attention that these research products, and that's really what they are, research products, are getting is correlated to the increased attention that policymakers themselves, as well as market participants, are increasingly giving to adapt to ESG considerations. And I think, again, that change has started. It's good to see, but we need to have good rules of the road. So at S&P Global, we welcome these initiatives to improve the transparency and the integrity of ESG ratings, as well as ESG data products. And we welcome the European Commission's initiative to introduce a regulatory framework on ESG ratings in the context of the sustainable finance agenda. We've been working this at S&P Global with securities markets participants and regulators for many years now, since 2017. And this included the IOSCO workstream, on which the EU's recommendations and regulation will be based on. So improving the transparency, the integrity here has been a journey. I think we're nearing the midpoint of that journey. And like I said, we're eager to see it evolve further. We think it's really critical that these emerging frameworks all around the world, it's not just an EU regime, there will be a UK regime. There are codes of conduct emerging in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in the UK, and in Europe. They really need to be as consistent as possible. And they really need to faithfully implement the recommendations that have been set at international level through IOSCO. I think the Commission proposal is a very valiant attempt to do that. I think we don't agree with everything that's in the proposal, but we think that the debate around how to improve certain elements of it is going to be able to make this a regulation that really works very well. So I'll focus my remarks on 3 points. The need to improve and standardize the actual inputs to ESG ratings in the first place, very briefly. We really need high quality assured raw data from all market participants who are disclosing in the context of securities markets, companies and asset managers to actually produce these ratings in the first place. The need to balance independence of the ESG ratings process as a ratings product with the need to ensure minimum standards for their integrity, high minimum standards, but minimum standards nonetheless. And finally, the need to ensure that we're not just protecting institutional investors here in the wholesale market. We have to also consider how retail investors will come across these products and how they will be using them. So on the first point, everything really stems from the analysis of ESG data, ESG disclosure. And if we just imagined a world in which financial reporting was not standardized, where companies used all sorts of methods, some valid, others not, to report their financial reports, we wouldn't have the type of financial system we have today. That is, I think, the objective. We need to get there in the sustainability space. We're seeing wonderful progress through the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We're seeing progress at the international level through the ISSB. But it would be extremely difficult, and it is extremely difficult, to figure out how people are reporting, what metrics they're using. So we need to see that change, I think, parallel to this regulation of ESG ratings. So we'd love to have perfect information as an ESG rating provider. We don't. We're doing all sorts of initiatives to try and improve that. But it's important to recognize that the raw data going into these products is something that we also have to solve from a policy point of view. We rely on it. We want to see it better. But I would love to see a world in which our financial reporting and our sustainable reporting goes hand in hand. We see quarterly earnings calls. Perhaps we'll see quarterly sustainability calls from CEOs and chief financial officers in the future. I think that's really important to get the input side of this right, before even an ESG rating becomes a question. So that change is happening. Like I said, we're not auditors as ESG rating providers. We are providing a research activity. It's, at the end of the day, it's an opinion, and I think we see ourselves more as providing a compass for market participants to be able to navigate according to what they think is important. And we all know that true north is different for different people depending on their values. Sometimes it's much easier to identify in terms of climate, but when it comes to social issues, for example, it can be a little bit more difficult. So my second point is really on that independence question. We think it's really important, regardless of how high quality the data becomes in the ESG reporting space. There will need to be some safeguards to recognize the different perspectives that exist in the market. And that independence, as you rightly said, Ugo, is not being challenged by this regulation. We think that's a critical point. You're not telling us how to do this. You're giving us the standards to do it to a very high quality with great transparency. And ultimately, the users will decide which ESG ratings they want to use, if any at all. And I think different investors want to see different things. Tanguy can probably touch on that. And the market will decide what it wants to measure, and the regulators will decide, what they want them to measure as well, I think. So we have to recognize that's an evolution. So that independence is critical. We still have to look at this from different perspectives. We have to have a number of opinions in the market. They have to be based on high quality data. They have to be high quality opinions. But the idea that they will correlate 100% at the end of this regulation, I think, is not the intent. And certainly, I think we would urge policymakers not to try to do that, because different ESG ratings try to do different things. The third point I'll make is on this regulation is looking primarily, I think, at the wholesale market for ESG ratings that are available to institutional investors. I think we would also recognize what ESMA has said, that the question of greenwashing can occur along the entire spectrum of the sustainable investment value chain. It can happen at the disclosure level. It can happen when someone's doing analysis to produce an ESG rating, but it can also happen downstream of that, where ESG ratings are taken together and repackaged, or financial instruments are marketed using an ESG rating. And we think all ESG ratings should be subject to the same rules, and that level of integrity should apply to all of them. And we hope the EU will not miss this chance to ensure that any potential greenwashing through ESG ratings is reduced by having these rules applied to all ESG ratings, particularly those that are used to market securities and financial instruments to retail investors. That'll be a job for the regulator in due course to figure out who this applies to and how it applies. But let me conclude, because I know that time is short. I think in a world of perfect information, there may not have been a need for ESG ratings in the first place, but companies would report perfect information according to perfect standards. I think that is a long way off if it's ever really achievable. So this is a world full of information. The value of these products is really for the user to decide. I'm not here to claim that our ESG ratings are better than anyone else's. I think these are an imperfect tool, but they do provide analysis, insight, information, using independent methodologies. It's so critical that the framework that governs them raises the bar on integrity and on transparency, but respects that fundamental question of research should be independent and it should be up to the user to decide which one they use. So let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good here, I think, because if you do that, you get neither perfect nor good. And with that, maybe I'll hand back to you, Hugo, and looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, David. Very, very interesting. I think that I've touched the key point already on independence. I think that the proposal for a regulation tabled by the European Commission respects exactly this key element of the independence of the provider. So it has been really interesting to hear the perspective of the industry which will be most impacted by the regulation, and I'm happy to see that overall the judgment is positive, of course, as long as we maintain a certain structure and a certain balance in the proposal itself. Just one last word from my side on sustainability reporting. This is very important. The consistency and the efficiency of the framework that we are putting in place is very important for us as well. We had a president panel within the same context precisely about these issues. All the standard setters were represented, and the main message which came unanimously across was collaboration, cooperation, convergence, interoperability as much as it is possible in order to offer as much efficiency it is possible to users. So we are working on that as well. After David, I would like immediately to turn to Elizabeth to hear the perspective of the entities which will be rated, and I would like, Elizabeth, to hear from you what's your opinion on the regulation, but more generally on the debate which is taking place worldwide about these issues.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Ugo Bassi and the Commission for this invitation. I'm delighted to present you the position of the large French companies, but many of my concerns, in fact, are shared by our German counterparts, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Italian company associations, which are gathered within European Issuers, which is the Association of Listed Companies in Europe, where I co-chair the Corporate Reporting Working Group. So in France, we have a long experience in ESG sustainability reporting, 20 years in fact, and ESG ratings are a huge concern to companies for several reasons, which I would summarize under 3 chapters: insufficient transparency, governance and conflicts of interest, and last but not least, quality. So I will get into each of these 3 issues in more detail. In a nutshell, we've been calling for a regulation for the last 5 years to make ESG ratings subject to the same organizational and transparency requirements as credit rating agencies. So we really welcome the Commission proposal, although on some points we would even like it to be more ambitious. But I'm also very positive because it's a very important issue for companies, and we really think it's a great step in the right direction. So briefly, the 3 points I have: insufficient transparency first, and I'm not talking about one specific rating agency. Obviously, that's not my intention today, but on general features which our companies are observing on the market. So there is a big confusion about what ESG ratings actually assess. Some agencies have made progress and are more transparent in the information they make publicly available. But when you try to understand what is really precisely rated, you will quickly end up with a big headache and quite little certainty, because you will wonder, what are we actually rating? Is it the financial risks for the company linked to sustainability? Is it the impact caused by companies on the environment, on human rights, or social factors? Or is it the capacity of the company to mitigate and address these risks, or to reach the objectives of the climate change and the Paris Agreement, or to contribute to SDGs, so to the sustainability goals? So there are many, many things that can be rated, and we honestly don't always understand which aspect we are rating, whether it's all of them together or one of them, and in which way. So obviously we know that ESG ratings are also a question of convictions and values. So, for example, is nuclear energy considered green or not? Is gender equality measured by the number of women on board, or by gender pay gaps, or the way women are promoted after maternity leave compared to men who don't take maternity leave? So there are many ways you can assess, and academics have shown that there are high divergences between ratings on one and the same company because of these differences in measurement, scope, and weight of criteria. We don't contest this, and we, I think, agree that we don't look for a regulation with 100% correlations, but we need to understand the differences, and only very high transparency on methodologies will give us the possibility to understand what we are talking about. And this is hugely important for investors in order to avoid misleading them in the green finance and how they will allocate their investments, and also for companies, rated companies themselves. Let me give you one example for misleading ratings due to a very simple thing, which is the sector qualification, which can be inappropriate. Let's take a famous French company producing personal care products. Depending on whether you rate it compared to competitors in the luxury goods and cosmetic market, or in the sector of basic consumer goods, the rating result will be completely different, because the criteria are not the same, the issues are not the same, and the rating will just be entirely different. So we need to know, for example, exactly which sector qualification is taken. And we also propose, and this is, I will get into this when I talk about quality, we think that rating agencies should discuss this decision with the companies, because the companies know best which activity they actually lead. So sometimes it's tricky when you have several activities in a company, but we think it would really lead to better results. Second, governance and conflicts of interest. So there are, let's say, two main issues. One is that some agencies offer consultancy services, either proposed themselves or through third parties which they recommend to improve ratings or fill out questionnaires in a better way, which we think is really source of conflicts of interest. It should be strictly regulated as proposed by the Commission. Second issue is the important question of NGOs. NGOs, charities, and other non-profit providers of ESG rating. I think the Commission proposed to include them in the scope. We totally agree. Some others say they should be exempted. We totally disagree for the following reasons. We think their scores have a considerable impact. They may have considerable impact on companies' reputation. Some of them are perfectly transparent and, working in an admirable way to defend public interests or causes which we all support. But some are less transparent as regards their sources of financing, the objectives they pursue, and you can imagine situations where they are led by foreign interests, maybe interests of competitors. And if we don't have the same strict rules on independence and transparency, we really have a problem. Because these ratings, whenever NGOs publish, public ESG ratings, they should be in the scope. And I come to my third point, which is on quality. So companies complain that they spend a lot of time correcting errors or data collected by artificial intelligence, or explaining why certain questions are not relevant to their activity. So the quality of the ratings could be immensely improved if there were more dialogue between companies and raters. Companies want a contact point. They don't always have a contact point. They want to know when the questionnaires come, when they are sent out, what the timing will be for the rating process, the precise terms, what is expected of them. And they want a right of reply before the rating is published. They want to be able to correct errors and have this possibility before the rating gets out. There should also be a complaints mechanism, which is foreseen in the Commission proposal, but sometimes it happens that companies file complaints with the rating agency, and either they don't respond or they respond with boilerplate language. And so we would like a more important role for ESMA to be played in this context. If there are, big issues of quality, for example, with a rating, we would like to be able to go to ESMA and have a right of appeal. And last but not least, the issue of controversies. This is something really, really preoccupying companies a lot. We hope and we really want controversy reports to be in the scope of the regulation, because again, they can have a huge impact on the reputation. You know how they work. Controversy reports are about actual or alleged situations or events in which companies' operations or products are reported to have negative impacts. And they use all kinds of sources, media, social media, NGO reports, etc. And they may result in so-called red flagging, which actually leads to exclusion from investment portfolio. So they have an immense impact. And we think we need to know the rules of how they work. So we want them in the regulation scope, because sometimes companies don't understand how these controversies are being dealt with by the rating agencies. Let me give you an example again. Imagine there is a safety incident somewhere in a plant, and the company deals with it, makes sure that it doesn't happen again. But then some agencies have rules which require special monitoring during, let's say, 5 years period, and they come again every year and tag this incident, although it's already been resolved. And companies don't always know what the rules of the games are. So we want really more transparency also on these controversy reports. Sorry. So that was all in a nutshell for the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I take basically that you also like, to a certain extent, the proposal, but you would like the Commission and the legislator to go a little bit further. There are interesting questions in your introductory remarks, certainly for David, when you request more dialogue, more interaction between the entities which are rated and rating providers. There is also a question for Ileana. I don't know whether you will have the time to reply to it. They would like to see an increased role for ESMA in the process. But before moving to Ileana, let me ask Tanguy. So to conclude the let's say the spectrum, I would like to hear the perspective of the investor. What do you think about what has been put on the table, and what do you think generally about this very interesting space? Tanguy, please, the word.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Hugo, for the invitation, and congratulations on organizing those site events. Instead of flying to Dubai, better to be here online Today is Finance Day at the COP28, so I think this is very timely. Let me just briefly introduce EFAMA for those who don't know anything about EFAMA. So indeed, you mentioned it, it stands for European Fund and Asset Management Association. Our membership consists of 28 different national associations across Europe, including the United Kingdom and Switzerland, and also around 60 large cross-border asset managers operating in Europe. Putting things in context, of course, we all recognize the climate change urgency. We need leadership in that space, and we, as an association, very much welcome the leadership shown by the EU and the European Commission. We are fully supportive of the objectives of the Green Deal and also, obviously, of the objectives of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan. I think our members, the asset managers, can play a very important role, either in financing the transition, or those companies in need of finance, or by also accompanying the companies and by way of engagement with our investee companies. But for all of that, we need an enabling framework. And what we see, and what we have seen for quite some time now, is an increasing demand for sustainable financial products. We are trying to meet those demands. And the key concern, and we had a conference last week here in Brussels, we had a CEO panel, and they were asked about their key concerns for the moment, and one of their top concerns was the risk of greenwashing allegations. So we need more data, we need reliable data, and we need more transparency along the whole ESG value chain. So we have, applying to financial market participants, we have the SFDR. We obviously have for companies CSRD, which is a major and a key improvement and really a milestone, I think, in our journey, our collective journey towards a more sustainable world. But when it comes to ESG ratings, there is a missing link. And so you, at the Commission, you consulted on the need for an ESG ratings regulation. We obviously responded to that regulation, and we were among those recognizing the need for a regulatory intervention, as there is overall a lack of transparency, and possibly also for some players a lack of integrity, and trust in this market is absolutely key. So all in all, we are very positive about the proposal made by the European Commission. It's a very important building block together with the other pieces of legislation I just mentioned, SFDR, CSRD and others. We welcome the choice of the legal instrument, regulation instead of a directive. We, like David, welcome the fact that your proposal is largely based on the recommendations and principles proposed by IOSCO, or adopted by IOSCO. I think that we do see a risk of regulatory fragmentation globally, and this is why we really need, as markets are global, we need to support the work of international standard setters such as IOSCO, and also other initiatives like the International Sustainable Finance Platform that is working on transition finance. We, the EFAMA, are supportive of those efforts at global level, because it helps establishing a global baseline and thereby reduce the risk of regulatory fragmentation. Also mentioned by you, David, I think this need for global convergence and interoperability is absolutely key. And I think we, as Europeans, we need to keep championing multilateralism, which the Commission is used to do. We support the approach taken by the Commission regarding, indeed, the transparency of methodologies. Again, as mentioned by you, David, I think that maintaining the independence of the ESG rating providers or the researchers is absolutely key. The expectations of market participants are very diverse. Some will be looking for a financial materiality approach or an impact materiality approach. It all depends on the type of strategy your fund is following, or it may also depend on the type of mandate that you will have received from your institutional investors. So I think the diversity of methods is absolutely key. It's also key for innovation purposes. You don't want to stifle innovation. It's still a nascent market all in all. It's a booming market, And I should have maybe mentioned that, asset managers are very heavy users and buyers of ESG ratings, hence our interest in the proposal you made. We also welcome the approach taken by the Commission regarding conflicts of interest rules. I think that we support this approach of separation of activities. We further welcome the proportionality measures that are integrated in the proposal, especially when it comes to small players, regarding the type of supervision, the fees, the phase-in approach adopted by the Commission. We support the supervision by ESMA. We believe that ESMA, over the years, has really built credibility and capability in that space, looking at credit rating agencies or benchmarks administrators. So I think it makes sense for ESMA to play that role. We further welcome this important provision in your proposal regarding fees charged to the clients by ESG ratings providers, fees that need to be, I quote, fair, reasonable, transparent, non-discriminatory, and based on actual costs. This will be quite an improvement, at least when it comes to some of those ESG rating providers out there. And we further welcome the quick progress that seems to be made in the Parliament, in the Council, and like Hugo, I would hope that this will be adopted under this cycle. That being said, and again, my overall message is one which is very positive. We do have two concerns, both related to the scope of the proposal, and this will not be new to you, Hugo. I think the first one relates to the provision of ESG data or data products. Those are not in scope for the moment. And we believe that those principles of integrity and transparency should apply, as I mentioned, to the whole sustainable finance value chain, and therefore also to the providers of ESG data or data products. We need to know more about the methodology they use when they publish estimates regarding, say, Scope 3 emissions of companies. We are, as I mentioned, not only heavy buyers and users of ESG ratings, but we also buy a lot and use a lot of ESG data for a number of purposes. So we were disappointed to see that the scope of this proposal was not capturing, if you wish, the ESG data and data products. I understand that CSRD will be implemented, but as we know, there is a phase-in period. So it will take some time. Also, CSRD will not cover our entire investment universe. We invest globally. So this is not for us a solution. I understand that a review clause is being discussed in the Parliament and in the Council. But then again, forcing a review of this regulation 3 years after its adoption means that at best, if we ever end up with a new regulation covering ESG data providers, it will take at least 8 years to get that new regulation. And so it means that we will have this data gap for 8 years, and this we believe we cannot afford. Again, it's a question of creating trust and transparency. It's about fighting greenwashing, and we fail to understand why there is an urgency to regulate ESG ratings, but not ESG data and ESG data products. That was my first point. My second and last point, and here I guess we do not share the views expressed by David regarding the internal ratings disclosed by asset managers. We do believe that there is a need to clarify some of the provisions of the Commission's proposal regarding the question of whether we are in scope or not. We feel that asset managers are already subject to conflicts of interest rules under different pieces of legislation. Likewise, we are also already subject to transparency requirements, notably under the SFDR, whether at level 1 or at level 2. Some of the disclosures of internal ratings that we do are mandated by law. especially SFDR, and those that are not mandated by law do not represent the marketing of a score or an opinion. It's a marketing of a fund, and we are not marketing opinions or scores, and we are not selling opinions and scores. So we believe that we should not be captured by this regulation. This is not necessary because we are already regulated, and certainly this would not be proportionate and run against the objective of promoting sustainable finance. I sometimes hear that, if the activities and the risks are the same, then the rules should be the same. I fully agree with that, but I would argue that our activities are very different, our risks are very different because we are already regulated, and therefore the rules should be different. I will just stop there, but I would hope for some time for discussion among us.
Thank you very much, Tanguy. I also noted down strong support, of course, with the two caveats that I hope, as you said, we will have the time to discuss at least shortly later. And precisely with that in mind, I will now give the floor to Iliana. Iliana, ESMA will be hopefully entrusted a further role in that space, authorize and supervise ESG rating providers. It's going to be a relatively new activity for ESMA. How you see this? How do you think you will go about it within ESMA? Would you think about it, and how are you organizing yourself in order to face this additional challenge? Iliana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Ugo, and good afternoon from Paris. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants in this panel. I was taking notes throughout. There are some very also interesting points from our side to take and reflect upon. So first of all, thanks for the invitation and for giving ESMA the opportunity to share its view. In principle, we welcome Commission's, of course, proposal, and we fully appreciate the role that ESMA has been given to play regarding the authorization and supervision of ESG rating providers. And we assume this responsibility, fully acknowledging that we will play part in the successful implementation or not of this regime. So our work on the topic of ESG ratings goes back in 2021 when we wrote to the European Commission highlighting our concerns around the lack of regulatory safeguards for ESG rating and data assessment tools. From our point of view, it was prudent to match the increasing demand for these products with increasing levels of regulatory safeguards to ensure, as other colleagues mentioned, their quality, reliability, and transparency. ESMA was privileged to lead the first global steps towards such safeguards with the delivery in 2021 of the IOSCO Good Practices for ESG rating and data providers. And as it was mentioned, these recommendations strive to set a common approach to the regulation of ESG ratings in multiple jurisdictions. And given the global implications of this market, ensuring alignment of any global standards is paramount. And we believe these principles are an important means of achieving this. So we were very pleased to see that the European Commission has chosen to maintain the momentum with the delivery of this proposal, and that this proposal seeks to maintain alignment with the IOSCO global standards. So zooming in the specificities of this regulatory proposal and with the hat of the future supervisor, I would like to highlight, and also I want to thank the participants for the nice words that they mentioned on the role ESMA played on supervising CRAs. We see similarities with the credit rating agency's supervisory approach and the supervisory powers that were granted to ESMA under the CRA regulation. And of course, we welcome this approach, given that there are parallels that we could draw between the two markets. To name a couple from a competition perspective, both industries can raise concerns as both markets are split between a few large providers and many smaller entities. As you all know, in the credit rating industry, mainly three are the market players that globally hold the dominant market share. Last year, we ran a call for evidence on the market characteristics for ESG rating providers in the EU. And that call for evidence showed that around 60 ESG rating providers are actively operating in the EU. But what we have also observed is that large ESG rating providers acquire smaller, more niche players. This is why we need to be mindful that any regulatory framework enables this dynamic market to continue to grow on one hand and fosters competition on the other. Overall, we think it would make sense that smaller providers can have exemptions from onerous governance requirements, but not from the quality of rating requirements. In this regard, we welcome the proposal under Article 20 of the draft regulation on the exemptions from certain governance requirements for smaller entities. The proposal allows ESMA to exempt smaller ESG rating providers at their request from complying with some of the regulation's governance requirements if the provider can demonstrate that the requirements are not proportionate to the nature, scale, and complexity of its ESG rating business. We expect this proposal to alleviate, to a certain extent, any barriers to entry and minimize the cost of compliance by exempting smaller entities from possibly unproportionate requirements. So in a nutshell, we see that the regulation drives to the right direction of proportionality. Probably there would be more areas that we would need to consider also from a supervisory perspective. In terms of scope, as you know, both credit ratings and ESG rating products are in fact an opinion on an entity, financial instrument, or product, which is based on an established methodology and is assessed using a defined ranking system. In this regard, both regulatory frameworks feature requirements for providers to have in place rigorous, systematic, and objective methodologies that should be validated and reviewed on an ongoing basis. On the transparency, which is the core of this regulation, the proposed Article 21 mirrors some of the requirements under the CRA regulation, and it requires that methodologies, models, and key rating assumptions are publicly disclosed on the ESG rating providers' websites. We expect this provision to mitigate some of the concerns over the so-called black box methodologies, where users of ESG ratings complain of insufficient disclosures on the individual methodological choices of ESG rating providers, such as lack of publicity around methodological changes. Also similarities on the similarity side. The principle of non-interference that applies to CRAs will also apply to ESG rating providers, who will remain in full control of their methodologies, as also set out in, I think, Article 26 of this proposal. For ESMA, the synergies that we can achieve on this area are clear. We will rely on our 12-year supervisory experience and know-how in supervising the application, validation, and review of rating methodologies. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the specificities of this product, because ESG ratings are different products from credit ratings. They are used for different purposes and are produced in different ways. Credit ratings provide an opinion on creditworthiness, whereas ESG ratings can have a wide variety of measurement objectives, and this variety drives also different methodologies and rating approaches. ESMA overall supports transparency of ESG ratings over consistency, and we believe that the proposal, and also, as Ugo mentioned at the start, moves to this direction. Different ESG rating products can be used for different purposes. Our approach focuses on ensuring that the products, no matter their measurement objectives, meet the same standards of independence, quality, and transparency. In terms of systemic impact now, credit ratings continue to play a key role in our regulatory framework, And while we have worked towards reducing mechanistic reliance on them, they still play an important role for financial market participants. ESG ratings, on the other hand, do not have the same systemic importance in our financial system as credit ratings. For this reason, we should be mindful of when applying our supervisory experience that we have gained from credit rating agencies to remember of that systemic importance. The regulatory framework, our supervisory approach, and the related compliance burdens for these firms should reflect that reality. From a more practical perspective, we are pleased that the regulatory proposal includes a range of options for non-EU ESG rating providers to continue providing ESG ratings to the EU financial undertakings. For ESMA, it is important that EU investors will continue to have access to the widest possible universe of ESG rating products. And for this reason, it is necessary to ensure that no matter the size or place of establishment of an ESG rating provider, there should be an appropriate legal gateway in the regulation that allows this entity to continue to serve their EU clients. Finally, in terms of differences, there is another aspect that differentiates ESG ratings from credit ratings and adds an extra layer of complexity on the supervisory approach we need to develop. When the CRA regulation came into force, credit ratings were already a mature industry, whereas ESG ratings is a market that is only nascent and quite heterogeneous. In terms of the actions that ESMA is currently undertaking, so we're looking forward for the conclusion of this legislative proposal, and we stand ready to support the Commission by developing the necessary technical standards. ESMA is also pleased in a wider context of contributing to the EU sustainable finance agenda, and we have received an additional mandate under the EU Green Bond Regulation, recently published in the Official Journal. And as such, we're also working towards the delivery of the first batch of technical standards required under this regulation. And we are also preparing to assume the respective supervisory responsibility vis-à-vis external reviewers of European green bonds. In terms of engagement, we have already started to prepare for our future supervisory roles by actively engaging with stakeholders and market participants in the ESG ratings and green bond industry, as we aim to collect detailed information on market practices to ensure we can apply a proportionate and market-relevant approach to our supervision. So, to conclude from our side, we fully support the EU's Commission proposal in this area, and we stand ready to provide whatever support is needed to ensure that it's implemented in an efficient and effective manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ileana. Very comprehensive and very clear. A lot of work ahead. Busy days, months, and years for you as well. It was very interesting to hear from all of you. So interesting that we basically almost run out of time. We have a few minutes left, but I would like to use them instead of making concluding remarks myself. I would like to use them to give you, David, Elizabeth, and Tanguy the floor again for a final comment. If you want to react on anything which has been said, please do so quickly and straight to the point. David, you can start.
Yeah, I can't agree more with what Ileana just said. These are not credit ratings. They are different products. They are trying to do different things. In firms producing ESG ratings, there may be multiple products that reach the thresholds, as described in the regulation of an ESG rating, performing very different assessments. And I think that is critical to understand, that you may have something measuring something in the environmental space that really is quite a niche rating, an assessment, an opinion about the performance in that particular context. And you can have on the other side of the spectrum a full suite ES and G rating looking at the entire ESG performance of a company or a financial instrument. And we're going to see, I think, people have underestimated how many ESG ratings may exist. I think that is something that we are about to discover once this regulation gets passed. And I don't envy the task of ESMA ahead of itself for writing the regulatory technical standards and discovering sort of what is on the threshold of an ESG rating, what is below it, what is above it, and how to treat different products looking at very different things. I think there will be a tremendous amount of work to do there. I think the industry needs to partner with the policymakers, with the supervisor in the next few years to reach that very high bar that we'd like to see, so that competition, as Eliana mentioned, this space can thrive on quality of the assessment, and that the users and the rated companies see an improvement in their experience in terms of engagement and in terms of the quality of output.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth, on behalf of the rated companies.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting debate. We agree that the work ahead is enormous for ESMA. That is true. Of course, we agree that there is a huge issue about the ESG data. We would also have liked to see it in the regulation. We understand there was not enough time and there was no time to do the impact assessment. I think as soon as the data is transformed, as there are estimates, we will need to look at it very closely. And obviously the data that companies produce have been standardized now by CSRD. So from next financial year 2024 onwards, the companies will produce standardized sustainability information, which is a huge challenge for them. They will be audited by special sustainability auditors, so there will be high quality standards. So definitely we think the companies should not be in the scope of future regulation of ESG data providers, because we are regulated, I think, in a sufficient way. But as soon as there are transformations, estimates, it's a good idea. And non-EU providers of ratings, it's welcome that they have access to the market, but they should have the same stringent requirements for transparency and independence. That is clear. And last but not least, I think if we want these ESG ratings to have value, we should also allow companies to communicate about them. So once they have a score or rating, we should let companies communicate freely at no extra cost about this ESG rating they have obtained, because they contribute to it, and sometimes they do a lot of work filling out questionnaires, so they should be able to use it in their communication as well.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Tanguy, from the perspective of the investor, the last message.
Yes, so just 2 points. I very much agree with Liliana when she said that it's important for third country providers of ESG ratings to be able to keep serving their EU clients. We need their ESG ratings. So I would hope that, the proposal of the Commission and the framework that is envisaged and the 3 different routes, recognition, endorsement, and equivalence, would be sufficient. But it is absolutely key that we still have access to their ratings. And my second point is, again, about these transparency and integrity principles that should apply along the entire value chain. They should apply to the issuers, to the ESG rating providers, the ESG data providers, and indeed the asset managers. But if the activities and the risks are different, then the rules should not be the same.
Very clear. Just 1 minute to do the most important part of my job. Thank you all warmly for your participation. It has been a great panel, a very interesting input. I think, listening to you all, that we are going in the right direction. As you know, the Commission proposes and then Parliament and Council decide. I think that many of the points for improvements which have been discussed here are on the radar screen of the legislator. We are, as I said, entering into the most interesting phase of the legislative process, which is trialogues. I hope that all these issues will pop up, even if they were not part of the original Commission proposal, and certainly you can count on the Commission to look at them with openness and in a constructive manner. Keep the balance, adjust when and where it is needed and possible. The objective being, as I said at the beginning, to produce a rule which is finally useful and easy to apply and fair, and which puts companies of all levels on an equal footing, which is extremely important. Thank you very much to my friends, panelists who have participated. Thank you also to the audience for the patience for listening, and I conclude this panel, and wishing you all a nice day. Bye. Thank you.